We've just taken a look at keywords, the reserved words in Python. We're now going to be taking a look and see what a Python instruction is. When we look at it, instructions are individual commands and statements in Python that perform specific actions when they're executed. They include operations such as assignments, functions, loops, and conditional statements. But let's take a look in a little bit more detail. We can look at some simple instructions where we're assigning X, a variable, the value of 5, an integer variable, a whole number. Or we can look at our function calls or invocations. So with our print function, this is an instruction. It does something individually. But we can also expand this a little bit and look at compound instructions. With a compound instruction, we'll be talking about a looping structure. So here we're looking at a for loop, where we're going to go through a set of numbers and then print out whichever number we're currently processing. Again, we don't need to understand too much about the code we're looking at the moment. We'll have individual sections as we look through it, but the main thing is understanding the different types of instructions, simple instructions that exist by themselves, and then compound instructions, which are groups of instructions. As we go through them, we can see simple variable assignments or function calls, moving up to our compound instructions, which can be for and while loops, as well as conditional statements using if. But as always, the very best way to start learning is to get some good hands-on yourself. The more practice that you get at writing and reading Python, the better you're going to be. So we're going to take a look at some variable assignments. We'll take a look at invoking different types of functions, and we'll look at using loops. Again, we don't need to understand too much about the code we're writing at this stage, but think of it the way you learn even as a child learning your native language. You hear it being spoken and you get used to the context it's being used in much the same way, introducing some of our Python code to you now, you'll get a greater understanding of it when we come to look at it later. So here we are in our glorious Jupyter notebook. We'll be taking a look at instructions, so I've named the notebook instructions. So we should be up and running and ready to go. Now, an instruction is the very basics, the foundation of our code. So it could make up something like this, a variable assignment. So I can have my variable called length, and I can assign it the value of 4, an integer, a complete number. So that's an instruction by itself. But there's nothing stopping me having multiple instructions. Obviously, code is often going to be made up of multiple instructions. Here we can then go through and assign the variable width with a value of 2. Notice that we're not quoting the 4 or the 2. These are numbers, so numbers are differentiated from strings that we have seen before by not quoting them. Now, if we look at something that's a compound instruction, that would be the definition of a function. So we can create ourselves a very simple function to calculate the area of a room. So we can have area, and then we can accept incoming arguments that are going to be passed through as parameters through to our function. So I'm using L and W for length and width, but they could be called anything. X, Y would also work. We put in our colon, and then we can return the value of our calculation. So that's going to be then our length multiplied by the width. But we use the parameter names, the names internal to the function. That's going to be L and W. That means I'm allowed to pass anything that's a correct value through to the L and W. Returning twice to make sure that I'm lined up with the left-hand side of the margin, I'm then able to go through and invoke a function. We've used the print function before, but I can also use the print function to invoke another function. So we've called this function area. We can then have our length, comma, and then width. So we're passing our arguments into the function. When they're received by the function, they become parameters. So we're passing now length and width into our area. And notice that I need to have two closing parentheses, one to close off the area function and one, of course, to close off print. Shift and enter on this is going to execute my code. And we can see then that we've executed the individual simple instructions as well as the compound instruction that we were defining our function area with. But we can also use looping structures, and we can look at a very simple for loop. Again, I don't need you to understand too much about a for loop at the moment, but I'm going to go for my number. Now, quite often in the examples, you'll see things like for I. Well, these are just variable names, but it kind of makes more sense if I put a longer name in, especially when we're learning. And we're going to use the range function. So all of these could be separate, but we're building them into a compound instruction. Where we're specifying range, we also need to make sure we do in range for my number in range. And with range, we're just using the uppermost value. And we can then go through and print my number. So we'll see all of the numbers being printed out. It will start on 0, but will stop when it gets to 2. So it stops before the upper number, and numbers by default start on 0. So we get 0, 1, and 2. We don't print the 3. So this gives us an idea of what an instruction is. It can be a simple variable assignment or a simple function call, but we can also put our instructions together into blocks to create compound instructions, such as the definition of our function here and the looping structure that we created with the for loop.